When we spend time with people and we come away saying, oh, if I could only spend more time with that person, how different I would be, it begins to tell us what it's like to spend time with God. When I think of Daryl and Barbara, whom I met just tonight, I'll talk about in a minute, but 4 moments come into my mind when I think of Daryl. One of them is probably one of the most difficult moments of his life, which became difficult for me because he had just recently encountered an event that would shake him to his core. And I didn't even know how to receive the story because it was so new to him, and it was certainly new to me. And so I've prayed for them continually. The second moment that comes into my mind is, Daryl, when you met up with Jerry and John Brunt at one of our get-togethers at ASRS, and I saw 3 friends that had been deep friends for years. I believe it was the 3 of you. And I watched you all as you walked down the corridor, and I was with you, and I was that kind of the misfit. But I just relished the moments of being with the 3 of you and the friendship that you had developed. And I thought then of how much that had meant to you in the process, in your journey. The third moment is when I sat next to you at a table, and you spent at a reception, and you told me in detail what it was like to go on your journey. And in that small way, I feel like you've allowed me to journey with you, and I am so looking forward to you and your story here with Barbara. Barbara, I know you through your husband. And now that I've met you, he has painted a most delightful picture of you, which seems incredibly accurate, which isn't always the case, when you meet someone through someone else. So I'd like to direct you to their bio. It's on this orange sheet. Barbara grew up in Montana, so she is a Montana woman. She was an English major in college with a master's degree in counseling. She spent most of her adult years focused on her primary interests, which I found were interesting, interior design and customer service. She earned a certificate in interior design and worked for others in her own business for several years. She and her family moved to Walla Walla, where she continued in that field before becoming director of the Walla Walla University shop in 1984. I'm just going to read one part of Daryl's story because we'll hear the other part tomorrow. Daryl was raised in the West. You didn't say quite where, but we'll leave it at that and let him say more. Began pastoral internship in Idaho and Oregon before going to a seminary in Michigan and postgraduate school in California. He pastored several rural congregations. He was an associate at the La Sierra University Church and senior pastor at Walla Walla University Church. And then he joined in 1993 the Walla Walla University, where he is now professor of religion and social work. So we'd like to welcome both of you here tonight.
Barbara told me I could talk first. Wasn't that nice of her? Carla, you give us a good introduction to what we intend to do, and that is not to face you with a scholarly discussion of the subject of the weekend, but simply share our story. I would wish that my left brain logical self would have sorted out all the subjects that are important ones to us in life, and then when the experiences come, we would have it all figured out ahead of time. But in this case, that's not been true for me, and so I have had to try to be a little Will Alexandrian about this, and that is to intuit my way into some discoveries of things that make sense when the picture comes together. So we just intend to tell our story to you tonight.
To do that, we're going to show a little video clip of our daughter Shannon. She is our elder daughter and spent a good deal of her time down here in Southern California in her early childhood. She attended Walla Walla college and then moved on, and we'll tell that story. But we want you to meet her. It doesn't make a lot of sense unless you have an idea of what she looked like and sounded like. For her funeral service, some of her friends from the communications department, which she graduated from, put together a video of crude home videos, some things from church. She was involved in a children's church. So the video itself, what the material they had to work with isn't all that professional, but they put it together as a tribute to her, and that way you'll get to meet her.
We've been planning for this morning for a long time. You've always been special to your family. And I'm very pleased to share what for me is a special day with you today, too. Your mom and I have prayed with you and for you many times while you've been growing up. We know, too, that there are many friends and other relatives here who have influenced Shannon to make this decision. And as she's baptized this morning, I invite you to stand with us and share this special moment.
Today was given by Bill, Ginger, and Linda. And got Jared, Chris, and will give us a trio.
Like that. Sorry, Dad. We know you didn't want it, but for your 50th, it's breakfast in bed. We promise.
Shannon?
This is Shannon. She's sitting with a whole group of friends, and one of their friends has the chicken pox and can't be here, and they hope she gets better soon.
Oh, that's a good prayer request.
Tina, where are you, young lady? Uh-oh. You hear that young lady part? That means trouble. Come in here, Mom. Tina, I cannot believe the way you acted towards your Aunt Matilda when she came. What's the problem, young lady? I've never seen you act like that. You kissed her, you called her name. But that's because she called me little darling, and she pinched my cheek. And besides, she smells funny.
There's no reason in the world for you to act like that towards an adult. You know better than that. Now, you get in with me right now. Let's go call her and you tell her you're sorry.
No.
Tina, I don't want to ever see you act like that again. You were very disrespectful. Now, come and say you're sorry to her.
But I'm not sorry, and you can't make me.
Give her a phone call and you tell her you're sorry.
No.
Come on, young lady.
Let us come together. Everybody stand up, okay?
What was your reason for going to Yap in the first place?
I wanted to go somewhere away from the States, experience a different culture. And I decided if I'm going to go that far, I might as well do something I will never, ever have a chance to do again. So,
And how has that changed the way you look at our community here?
I respect people a lot more from where they're coming from. I try to look at things now from their point of view instead of trying to make them look at things from my angle all the time. Oh my God.
I need your heaven, oh I love you. The sounds are all the different as the land from which you came. And though the words are all different, our hearts are still the same.
Hey, look at the sign here. You got a pretty good welcoming committee.
I know, right? Mrs. Bigger? I was answering that yesterday on the airplane. Somebody was like, is there a Miss Bigger here? I'm like, right here. Hi! He's going nuts.
I think she knows you.
That's your memory. Oh,
Shannon Marie Digger, Christian Service Volunteer. Her diploma will be presented by her father, Dr. Gerald Digger, Associate Professor of Religion and Social Work.
Because you've indicated your love for God and your acceptance of Jesus as your Savior, I now baptize you in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's pray. Lord God, we remember this morning in a special way how you all want us to be your sons and daughters. We're grateful for the opportunity to accept your love and forgiveness and eternal life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Shannon graduated in 1995 and felt very fortunate to have a paid internship at Washington Adventist Hospital. She was going to work in their philanthropy department. Daryl and I don't know how we raised a daughter that wanted to ask people for money, but we did. So she did an internship back there. And over Memorial Day weekend of '96, she interviewed at Gem State Academy in Idaho and was going to come home to the Northwest and be their alumni and development officer at that boarding academy. On Father's Day, June 16, we were in Portland where Daryl was officiating at a wedding, a couple of Shannon's friends, and I was taking meticulous notes for her as she couldn't be there. Little did we know what was happening across the country. On Monday morning, I got a call at my office asking if I could please come to the chaplain's office. John Kress was our chaplain at that time. And I said, well, yes. He said, it's a personal matter of some urgency. And I could not figure out what that could be. It sounded mysterious. But when I arrived, I discovered that we were waiting for Daryl, and I didn't know that he was going to be coming. I tried to chit-chat with John about the wedding we had attended over the weekend, and he was very quiet. And he finally said, I'm sorry, I just can't talk right now. So I just sat.
John called me in my office that same morning. I was packing up my things, getting ready to move to a different office on campus. I was the acting dean while Doug Clark was doing an archaeological dig that summer. And he asked if I could come to his office right away. I said, well, I'm just packing up. I'm going to move across campus. Can we set an appointment this afternoon? No, he said, I need to talk to you now. So when I went and walked in and saw Barbara sitting there, I was immediately worried.
When Daryl arrived, John was ready to talk then, much as he hated to. And I'll never forget him coming around his desk and standing in front of us, and he said, "I have the worst possible news I could share with you. Shannon's been killed." When he said that she had been killed, I immediately pictured the intersection, because I knew she went through a 5-way stop intersection on her way to work every day. And I wondered how many other people were involved, how many other cars there were. And it was absolutely incomprehensible when he said she's been murdered in her apartment. And I felt like the blood absolutely drained from my head to my toes. I didn't know anybody who had ever had that happen before. That only happens to other people. They had taken very good care of us. John arranged for Henning Gouldhammer, one of our other pastors, to come and join us and make sure we had a ride home and all the logistical things that needed to be done. And I remember wanting so desperately to control all of that and wanting to decide who do we tell when and how do we get home and do I go back to my office and tell my staff and all of those kinds of logistical things. I couldn't even cry at the time. I was so stunned. But Daryl took care of that for me.
I did it for you, at least. Immediately when John told us that Shannon had been murdered, I began to cry. And even now, memory and the heart are all wrapped up together, and it all comes back when we tell the story. Even though grief studies have moved a bit away from the Kubler-Ross sequence of steps now, many of those were very true for us. And I was glad to know that John had made arrangements for us to talk to people in Maryland. He asked if I would like to speak with some of the detectives. And having them on the phone, I think, did away with any kind of hope that this was a horrible mistake, that they had misidentified her or connected us with the wrong person. But there was no doubt when they described where she was, and our world just went upside down. I think your immediate plotting of what to do next and who to see was much more substantive and organized than mine. I didn't know what to do or what to say or what needed to be done.
I didn't either, I guess, but I knew somehow I felt I needed to take charge. And that was the only way I knew how to do it at that moment. My parents had recently moved to Walla Walla, in fact, just 5 days before, on Shannon's 25th birthday. They didn't even have a telephone yet. So I knew we needed to tell them, and I knew all these various things that needed to be done. We did tell them before we went home. I told my staff. Then the amazing thing was when we got home, our younger daughter, Hillary, was there. We're getting ready to attend summer school session that morning. She knew that it was strange that a couple of people from the college had shown up at our house asking for Daryl, like the college president and a vice president, and we weren't home. She didn't know, she was going to invite them in, but they didn't want to come in. I mean, she didn't even know yet. But when we got home, we were absolutely overwhelmed with caring people. And one of them is sitting in this room, Nellie Thomas, along with some deans. And I remember you shaking rugs on our front porch to help. We'd been gone all weekend, and so people were pitching in to help us clean house. I didn't want anybody cleaning my house. I hadn't cleaned it first. I'm one of those kinds of people. But people just did things for us, and it was a wonderful, wonderful gift. I remember one of our close friends and a former teacher of Shannon's said, I want to take your laundry home and do it. I would never have thought of doing, even offering to do somebody's laundry for them. And it was a wonderful gift. I protested at first, but it happened. But all of these things were happening within the space of what seemed like weeks, and yet it was compressed into about a day. We were trying to make decisions about, do we have a funeral? Do we have a service in Maryland first? Do we do it in Walla Walla? All those logistical things were just overwhelming. You don't want to have to think about such things ever, but they had to be taken care of.
And some of the complication in those decisions was that because she was the victim of a crime, the coroner had to do all of those tests, and they didn't release her body for a while. I think my logical self kicked into gear when we started planning, after we had made the decision to bury her in Walla Walla, bring her body back out there. And we had a memorial service that the Silver Spring Church in Maryland coordinated. When we started planning the service in Walla Walla, Darrell, the pastor, rose to the moment. And I finally had to have, was it you or someone else? Was it you? Who finally in the conversation...
Someone else told me to do it.
Oh, I see. In the conversation with pastors as to what would happen, she finally told me, Darrell, you need to leave them alone and let them do this. I was micromanaging to the extent of how long it would take when the person reading the obituary finished and they sat down before the next person got to the microphone. I mean, it was that oppressive. But there was, for some reason, some comfort in those things with which I was familiar, because it restored a sense of stability in all the chaos. You ready to talk about her coming home?
I'm catching Anthony.
We flew her body home, and the airport to which she came was in the Tri-Cities, for those of you who know that part of the world, in Pasco. And so we drove over there. John Brunt, who was the academic dean at the time, drove us. And I decided to ride home in the hearse with Shannon. I was not prepared to discover where we would meet the hearse. They told us to wait not in the passenger terminal, but in a separate building where the air freight was loaded and unloaded. So when the plane landed, we watched all the passengers get out and walk into the terminal. And then they started unloading the luggage from the back. And out of the back of the airplane came a wedge-shaped white cardboard box that was sat on the back of a golf cart and bounced across the tarmac into the air cargo place and put in the back of the hearse. It was heart-rending for me. And on the way home, I sat in the passenger seat with Barbara in the middle and had my arms part-time around Barbara, and then would reach back behind the seat to touch where Shannon was. It was a horrific homecoming.
We're going to back up a bit now to Sunday. Again, when all of this happened, Shannon was actually killed on Sunday evening. And by Monday morning, when we got the phone call, we still, of course, didn't know who had done this. And it was amazing to me to know that detectives were working 30-plus hours straight to find her killer. They'd gone into her apartment and looked around and read things and realized, they said, that she was not a druggie or a prostitute. Now that says something sad about how they treat those kinds of people and try to find their killers. But they were determined to find Shannon's, and we're grateful for that. They knew that from a video camera at the entrance, Shannon lived in an apartment complex with about 3 or 4 buildings, and each apartment had an outside entrance. But there was only one way in and out of their parking area. And here is a camera mounted on a good-sized pole with a sign about so long that says surveillance. I'm not sure if the person could read that sign or not, but it was there, and they watched the tapes. Found a white van that had gone in and out, and they got the license plate from that van. Discovered that the van was stolen. The license plate was stolen from yet another vehicle. So they went hunting for the van in the neighborhood where it had been taken in Washington, D.C. They drove for hours and nothing turned up. Finally decided this is futile, so they were going to quit in the wee hours now of Tuesday morning, and pulled up to a stop sign along Georgia Avenue. For those of you who know Washington, D.C., it's a main thoroughfare. And a white van pulled up beside them. They let it go ahead, and there was the license plate they were looking for. These were, however, Maryland police, and they were in the district, so they had to get a patrol car from the district of D.C., Washington, D.C., and they pulled him over. The man driving the van at that time said he knew nothing about a crime, but his partner in crime had wanted the van on Sunday to pull a caper, as he put it. And he showed the police where this person lived. They got a search warrant and went and arrested Anthony Robinson, who was in the basement, his room was down in the basement of where he and his mother lived. He was watching Shannon's television set, and he had her camera and flute and a Walla Walla College video yearbook. What was he going to do with that? But there were many things that led them to know that he had indeed been at her apartment. They later found a palm print of his in her apartment on her sofa, the arm of it, so that it put him at the scene of the crime. Anthony pleaded guilty to 3 counts: first-degree murder, which is premeditated; attempted sex offense, which I didn't know what that was before, but it meant, essentially, in my layman's terms, that the way she was found, it was evident that he intended to rape her, but they couldn't prove it, and he would not admit to it. But they still charged him with attempted sex offense and armed robbery. He pleaded guilty to those, and I thought, why would anybody plead guilty to first-degree murder? Well, Maryland has the death penalty, and he wanted to avoid that. So he got life in prison without possibility of parole for that crime. He got another consecutive life sentence for the attempted sex offense, and another additional 20 years for the armed robbery. So Anthony Robinson, who was then only 23 years old, is spending the rest of his life in Jessup, Maryland, in the penal system. And I'm glad that he's not going to hurt anybody else, but it's been quite a journey.
Our personalities have changed as a result of this. I remember being as charmed as I was by Barbara, mystified by her. In long, quiet drives in the car in the early years of our marriage, I would sometimes ask her, "What are you thinking about?" Well, it seems a simple enough question to me. What are you thinking about? If you asked me in those days what was I thinking about, I could start in the middle of the sentence, in the middle of the paragraph that was going through my mind at that moment. How hard would it be to verbalize that? It was uncomplicated. And Barbara's response to those kinds of questions, what are you thinking about? Her response was this. I don't know how to put it in words. And it was not until after Shannon was killed that I learned what that meant and how one lives without words going through your mind. I have learned what it is to pray without saying anything. I went for almost a full year and did not read a book. What I appreciated most was silence and instrumental music, particularly Bach, which once you start it, the metronome doesn't stop until it's all finished. The stability and predictability of that monotonous movement from beginning to end was somehow soothing to me. We've sometimes asked now, years and years later, our surviving daughter Hillary, doesn't it seem that we're back to normal now? And she says, no, not yet. Many things were of comfort to us, and if the spotlight were on the whole subject of recovery from trauma, we could talk more broadly about some of those things, but I want to mention at least name two of them. One of them, both Lambertons, I see you're both here now. One of them came from their daughter Jill, an introduction to an Edna St. Vincent Millay poem that I had not known before called Dirge Without Music. It begins, do you know that one? I am not resigned to the shutting away of bodies in the cold ground, etc. Those unspeakable things articulated by poets and musicians meant a lot to me. And the other thing that was most touching for me was people who connected often without ever saying anything. One man whom I first got acquainted with while he was growing up down here in California, and then he later went to Walla Walla and was on our dorm staff as a dean for some time. At the funeral, as people were going through the line afterward, came to me and reached out both his hands, and while he held my hands, looked right straight into my eyes and said nothing. But I felt held and comforted. One of the things that I was very worried about, if I would anticipate this kind of thing in my life, is a level of anger that would, I don't know you well, Ruthita, but I think it would have rivaled whatever temper you may have. I was infamous in my childhood days and have spent young adulthood trying to throttle and control that. I was so grateful with a focus to the source of this injustice that I was not immediately livid with rage at Anthony, we sponsored our hockey team on campus for a few years when they first got started. And I used to think, actually, that if anything happened to really set me off, I would need to be surrounded with some of those great big hulking guys to protect the rest of the world from me. But God saved me. And for weeks and months, I didn't face that kind of rage. You want to say anything more about that? Okay. But here's where the twist came for me. The last visual image we had of Anthony was at his sentencing. We flew back to the courthouse in Maryland to be there in that room. And as the state's attorney, who had spent a significant amount of time with us, in fact came out to our place in Walla Walla before the sentencing to get acquainted with where it was Shannon grew up and what her environment was as she was growing. When he came to the end of his summary, he got a little more animated than I would have, and in his speech to the judge said, "And this man," pointing at Anthony, "who committed this heinous crime," and we haven't described that in detail to you, but we're willing to talk about it, "he tied Shannon up in bed, stabbed and slashed her to death. This man who has committed this heinous crime deserves to spend the rest of his life in his own private hell." And at that, Anthony, who had been sitting very quiet, head down most of the hearing, raised his head and looked at that state's attorney and gave him the finger. That was my visual image of this man who had slashed the life out of Shannon. Months later, the following spring, we got a phone call from the state's attorney saying that Anthony had filed an appeal. He wanted to change his plea to not guilty, and he wanted his sentences reduced. And at that moment, all those months of peace were gone for me. I was instantly furious at this man. That happened early in the week. And during the rest of that week, I tried to regain some emotional control of my life. Knots in my stomach, tense jaw, clenched fists, not able to think reasonably, you know, all the symptoms, right? And I should have known how to do this. I was, after all, a lifelong Christian, a professional Christian, if you will. I was teaching the spirituality class on campus where we practiced meditation exercises. I had taught the stress management class on campus. I know all about body relaxation, deep breathing, on and on. I knew all that stuff. And I worked like a demon all week long trying to make those things work, and nothing helped me. I went to church that Sabbath morning a wreck. And John Kress, no one else but Barbara and I knew what was happening that week. John Kress, the one who had told us about her death in the first place, happened to be speaking that Sabbath morning. And as part of his sermon, referred to Jesus' invitation, description, that others would know us as Christians by our love for one another. Well, that was a bad beginning in the first place for me. And then when you jump from that to other comments Jesus made about loving one another, he doesn't just stop at the people inside your little circle, right? It isn't just your loved ones and friends. It is loving your enemies. And I had tried for a week to let go of this and could not get it done. I was an absolute failure at this one little thing God wanted from me that I could not do. And that led to the reality that if I could not do what God asked of me, if I could not respond to God's wishes for my life, then I was separated from God himself. I was isolated from the source of hope and energy and meaning in my life, which is exactly what I had been saying about Anthony for the past 6 months. That meant that I, in God's eyes, was on a par with the man who slaughtered my child. It was humiliating for me. And as I sat in church that morning, stunned by this reality of who I am as a person, not a nice, kind, gentle pastor, but an angry, resentful, cynical, vengeful human being. That's who I am. When I accepted that about myself, I felt horribly lost. And then another text came to my mind. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Huh? So it wasn't just when I got angry at my sister that Jesus forgave me. It was not when I was frustrated by the slow driver in front of me, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all those little behavioral issues through my life. It wasn't that limited God's forgiveness of me. It was me as this angry threat to the rest of humanity that God saved on the cross. And this is the part of the story that I wish were not true. At that moment, I realized that the knot in my stomach was gone. And my fists were relaxed. And I felt a sense of peace and openness that I had not felt for days and weeks, and it's a different feeling than I've ever had my whole life. Without pretense, I had seen myself as the offender. And God loved me anyway. And that act of forgiving me, the sinner, changed my attitude toward Anthony. While I was walking out the aisle that Sabbath morning, I also realized that a hurt that I had carried for months and months and months about someone who I felt had misrepresented me and betrayed me, that hurt was also gone. And all of that was changed without my doing anything. I could not tell you what I had accomplished or what steps I took. It happened to me. It was not something I did. Forgiveness for me was a gift and not a work. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Barbara's experience was quite different from that, both early and later. So you need to compare the two before you have your discussion together.
January 14, 2011. My dear Shannon, several years ago, your dad and I were first asked to talk about forgiveness in the context of your murder. Since we vowed to tell our story whenever someone asked, here I am, again. You love to talk, so this seems fitting and appropriate. As a communications major in college, you seem to come up with the most clever ideas and words to express yourself. I'm not that creative, but writing you a letter helps me, even though you'll never hear nor read it. When Anthony Robinson got into your apartment on that Sunday, I can't even imagine the sheer terror you must have felt. I want to believe that God kept you from feeling the pain and humiliation as Anthony brutally killed you. The detectives said you were rendered unconscious very early on. I choose to believe that was true. You'd be glad that our dear friend John Kress was the one who told us of your death. He was so kind about it. Then he, Henning, Stephen Payne, your old boss, John Brunt, and Liz Heisler stayed with us for days as we sorted out the logistics of your service, who to ask to serve as your pallbearers, do the music, and take part in your funeral at the then Walla Walla College Church, your church, where you served as a deaconess and a student elder. The Maryland police and detectives worked very hard on your case. They found your prayer journal beside your bed and read it. Your silent witness made them determined to find your killer. Amazingly, Anthony was found and arrested early Tuesday. At first, he denied any connection, but later he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, attempted sex offense, and armed robbery. Your neighbors identified him as going in and out of your apartment that fateful Sunday, Father's Day, and your Grandpa Messenger's birthday. Since you were moving soon to start your new job in Idaho, the neighbors thought Anthony must have bought some of your stuff so you wouldn't have to pack it. The impact of losing you, my firstborn, was and still is and ever will be enormous. The fact that you died such a violent death made it almost more than I could bear. However, as you always did, I put my trust in God and leaned heavily on Him. He also knows what it's like to lose a child by violence. How could I forgive Anthony, this man who violated you? I can't take any credit for not hating him. Jesus gave me that forgiveness early on. The one I hate is Satan. I was and am so angry at him that I almost felt guilty about it. And I think you might get a chuckle out of that. Is it wrong to hate Satan? In some ways, it was easy for me to forgive Anthony. Perhaps I've wanted to explain why he might have done this horrific deed because it would be easier for me to cope. Maybe he was on drugs when he attacked you, though by the time he was found, that couldn't be proved. Why wasn't he celebrating Father's Day with his dad? There was never any mention of a father in his life. He'd been in and out of mental hospital, and he made terrible life choices. Someone like that triggers pity from me more than hatred. Oh, I hate what he did to you. And I believe he should suffer the consequences of his actions. Life in prison without the possibility of parole isn't too harsh a punishment in my mind. Nevertheless, I have forgiven him. For me, the real test of forgiveness came when I felt convicted to pray for Anthony. How could I pray for someone who killed you? But Jesus prayed for those who were nailing him to the cross. And he taught us to love our enemies and those who hurt us. So I asked Jesus to make me willing to pray for Anthony. It took many months before I could do that. However, thanks to my Savior's persistent nudging, I've been able to pray that Anthony will learn about Christ and his forgiveness, a gift much more important than my forgiveness. After all, Jesus died for Anthony just as much as he did for you and me. And I know you'd want us to forgive your killer. Once convinced that something was right, you let nothing stand in your way to follow those convictions. Thank you for modeling that. When I saw the prison where Anthony is incarcerated, those brick buildings surrounded by rows of razor wire, I sobbed with grief again. My heart ached with loneliness for you. But I also wondered about Anthony, then only about 31 years old. What must it be like to spend every day of your life locked up? Does he ever feel sorry or guilty for what he did to you? Will he ever know he's forgiven? Does that idea even cross his mind? I want to remember that forgiveness is a gift from God. He knows that hatred and anger only hurt us, not those who perpetrated the harm. I need to remember that I can't do anything, including forgiving Anthony, to make myself good enough to save. I need to remember to stay connected to Jesus so that I can see you again, my dear Shanny. We know your life wasn't perfect, but you were certainly headed in the right direction. Someday you'll be surprised to learn that your death has helped others. Perhaps you'll meet someone in heaven who says, "You don't know me, but I'm here because of you." I can imagine you saying, "See, Mom, it was worth it." Until then, I'll keep on praying for Anthony, for myself, and for all our family and friends. Telling our experience here in Loma Linda reminds me of years gone by when we drive from Disneyland to our home on Meade Street with 2 sleeping girls in the back seat. Visiting the happiest place on earth made you the happiest girl alive, even into adulthood. How could your sweet life end in such tragedy? When I watch the news clips of a body bag being carried out of your apartment, it always seems surreal. Can that possibly be our girl? That only happens to other people. Sadly, sin happens, and your death is a small part of the huge sin problem everyone faces. We just have to make a choice about how we'll deal with it. I'm choosing to keep asking Jesus to hold my hand as we continue to walk through this valley. When we visit your grave, I hate leaving you at Mount Hope Cemetery. But one day, it will be a glorious place when all of you who died in Christ will rise first. I love and miss you so much, and I'll see you then, Mom.
I realize it's about 2 minutes after, but one of my bad habits is leaving out crucial parts of this story that leave some of you hanging in midair wanting resolution somehow. Is there anything about facts of the case or what we've shared that you want to ask about? Please. Yes. Oh, see, good. Wonderful illustration. What happened to his appeal? It was rejected.
Twice.
Twice, Barbara says.
Appealed again.
Yeah, he had really sacrificed a lot of his opportunity to do that by pleading in the first place. And so the appeals were simply on whether or not he had received a fair evaluation and sentencing. And that was not overturned. So he is still in Jessup. Yeah. Yes?
You mentioned that you wondering why he was not celebrating Father's Day. Was there ever any information about this young man's mother?
You want to talk about that? We met her.
On the phone first.
And talked to her on the phone. On the phone, it was a television reporter, actually, who was the initial go-between between the two of us. The reporter who had interviewed both her and our side of the family asked if it would be all right for her to get in touch with us. She would like to do that. So she reached us just as we were on the way out to Sabbath school one Sabbath morning and told us how sorry she was that she had not raised her son like this, that she had taken him to Sunday school regularly. And she was so glad to discover that I was a pastor, because then she said she wouldn't worry about the rest of her children. Do you middle-class people know what she was talking about? She was worried that we might go after her kids in revenge. Yeah. So, thinking I was a clergy person made her feel a little safer. Yeah. But we've lost track now and haven't been in touch. The other question that sometimes comes that we didn't mention is, have we had any contact with Anthony? About 3 years later, I was ready to do that and contacted the prison, was put in touch with the psychologist and the chair of the psychology department where he was being held, and told him a little bit about my own background and experience in prison as a chaplain. I'm going to leave more questions than I answer, aren't I? And he explained to me at that time, and it has happened again since then with the coordinator of the penal system in the state of Maryland. They had experimented in that state with some contact between victims and perpetrators, and it had not gone well. And they are not allowing any contact whatsoever. We can't write a letter, no phone calls, no nothing, either direction. So we don't have that personal contact.
Darrell, when you say it didn't go well, can you expand on that a little bit? When they were experimenting?
Yeah, the woman at the state of Maryland talked about that some. Both victims, families, and perpetrators just lost it, and they had some very intense emotional times, and some, of course, they had guards there as well, but some physical acting out, threats and rushes at one another. So they just prohibited any contact at all now. Yeah. Okay?